Chris Ball, Rob Fairhead, Joe Smith, Bertie Sabi, all part of the Network Rail team to give a presentation. That we're going to have Chris giving a PowerPoint presentation on where we're up to with Cambridge North Station. Colleagues will also comment on that. We have Paul Mumford as well from South Cam, who's going to follow up then with some points on the planning side of things. Bertie Sabi, an update on Fenway Level Crossing, and then I'm suggesting we all get together around the parts of the tables we have in the hall, and we'll go around each group with a sort of question and answer, and they'll be responded to accordingly. So, Chris, if we can kick off, take us away. Yes, thank you very much.
Is it possible that somebody could turn the light? Thank you. All happens around. What we want to do, what we're going to do today is the three of us talk. Joe is looking after the project from Network Rail's point of view on the site. So he's going to give you the overview as to where we are on the scheme. And I know there's probably a live debate at the moment is the planning application that's recently gone in for moving the car park. And then I'm going to take you through, both going to take you through, probably me particularly going to take you through some of the work that's been going on over the last few weekends, because as you will probably know, the railway between Cambridge and Ely has been closed over the last couple of weekends to allow Network Rail to make this work all the way along the line, and that's allowed us to get some cars and equipment onto the railway and do some of the work that we need to do in advance of the scheme. And then Rob is here to talk about where we are with the station opening date and other things like that. And Bodie, who I've not forgotten about, is here again today, because a couple of meetings ago he was here outlining the proposals for replacing the existing level crossing equipment at Fen Road level crossing, and he's going to give us all an update on where we are with that. So, are we there?
As a great introduction, whilst I fiddle with the machine and try and get it to expand. My name is Joe Smith. I'm project manager for the Cambridge North Station project and the freight siding scheme, which is a relocation of the freight sidings within the Chesterton Junction Yard that's been carried out in conjunction with this project. Unfortunately, we're not able to get the slideshow up so you can flick through and the annotations show. So we're going to make do, and we'll talk through the slides as they're seen on the screen. Hopefully you can see them all. We're going to give you a quick project overview of work done to date, essentially, and a reminder of what the actual scheme looks like. Okay, so just to put it in context, I'm sure you're fairly familiar with where the station is proposed to be located. Down by just for a point of reference, Milton Road runs along the sort of top left-hand corner of the screen. The proposed access to the station will be via Cowley Road, adjacent to the golf driving range and the DVLA driver centre. So the main access to the station for vehicles will be via Milton Road, down Cowley Road, and then into the current Chesterton Junction Yard where the station is proposed to be built. Those of you that have travelled out Milton Road are probably aware that a guided busway has already been extended in lieu of the new station being built, and that's now installed and ready for the station project to tie into. The station building itself is going to be constructed in the southern extremity of the site, just in the corner here. just north of the Fen Road level crossing that's located here. The station itself essentially tags on to the existing infrastructure, the up and down main, with an island platform and a single platform. The single platform serving the up, so if you was travelling to London, you would be accessing on the single platform. And then there's an island platform for trains, essentially a bay platform, which is to enable trains to terminate at the station, and then the down to enable trains to travel to Ealing and pick up at Ealing.
We have tried very hard to reduce the amount of technical speak in this presentation, but I have to apologise for my colleague who has been able to tell you that in this particular instance, up is down and down is up. So if you're going up, you're going to London in the south, and if you're going down, you're going up to Ely. I hope that's very clear to you.
Apologies for any technical talk, which Network Rail will notoriously poor for. Chris can correct me as I go along, and I'll apologise in advance because it's ingrained in me, unfortunately. Okay.
So, sorry, we're not doing very well tonight, are we?
There we go. 2 more, right? 1 more. Okay, so here's a schematic. It's obviously not what it's going to look like at the ground, but it just gives you an appreciation of the track layout as shown on site. So as mentioned earlier, we've got the up and down way, which is the main line that's currently in existence. And what's shown just to the top of that is the Chesterton Junction Yard. And now this is the proposed layout, or the layout that we've recently installed. This new layout was a scheme that was derived by Network Rail because the current operation within the Chesterton Junction Yard, when trains were entering into the Chesterton Junction Yard, to actually manoeuvre into the correct siding to discharge the materials that came in via train, they had to foul the main line at this point here. So essentially, when trains were historically manoeuvring within the Chesterton Junction Yard, they'd foul that point, which would lower the level crossing, and there'd be a period of downtime whereby vehicles could have crossed the level crossing whilst that train undertook the manoeuvre to get to the location. As a consequence, Network Rail have seen that as a constraint on the network and obviously a hindrance to the local residents. And we've implemented this scheme that enables trains to come straight into the Chesterton Junction Yard and manoeuvre within the junction yard without failing the main line. Essentially, that ultimately means that there'll be less downtime on that barrier, on the barrier crossing when trains are manoeuvring within the Chesterton Junction Yard. These works have actually successfully been installed and they've been in operation since the beginning of December. I'll show you some progress pictures of those works that have been carried out in conjunction with the station project as we move through the slides. Okay, so I previously showed you what we refer to as the MIR application. It was the first application that was submitted by Cambridgeshire County Council, and Network Rail subsequently submitted a revised application such that we could actually implement the works. Following Network Rail receiving this project from the council and the good design work that they've done, there had been a key constraint on the site removed. Essentially, roughly where that red line follows, which is basically the access into the station, there was the old freight siding that Network Rail have essentially moved to a more convenient location to remove the classical level crossing. Essentially, it's been moved in parallel with the main line. So when Cambridgeshire were developing the design, they had to ensure that all the station building was to the left of that red line. Now that that's been diverted, it's essentially it's opened up the entire site. And as a consequence, Network Rail had a look at that and would put together a more efficient design that enables future-proofing essentially, and takes into account the council's future master planning of the wider area. Obviously, being a rectangular car park, it lends itself to be decked in the future should the number of car parks exceed the supply that's currently provided. So if the 450 is insufficient, then there's now a more reasonable means extending that car park and providing further car parking spaces. There was also an aspiration to provide a wider, more direct boulevard to the station. So essentially, when you come off of Cowley Road, there was a clean line of sight straight to the station building that enabled a wider master plan around the wider, the wider area within the Chesterton Junction Yard itself. The station building and platforms and all the cycle canopies and the guided busway leading in hasn't changed. It's purely the boulevard leading into the station and the car park itself. So the visuals that you would have seen of the station remains one and the same.
And that's the application that's currently under review, isn't it? With the council.
Correct. This application was submitted with the council just before Christmas for initial review, and hopefully it will go to JDCC, so the Joint Development Review Panel, in March. That's our target date. Here's one of the animated pictures that we can't actually see, so you can only see the station at night, which shows off the value quite nicely at least. I think the architect's done quite a good job, to be fair, of the station building. When it's first built, it will be in quite a remote area until the area around it's developed. So the architect wanted to make a structure that was quite visual in the daylight, so it's this perforated aluminium, so it looks like a solid structure when you're approaching it from the distance in daylight, whereas at night they wanted to light up the station and well, it looks quite dark around the edges. But the station building itself, where it's a perforated aluminium cladding, the light seeps through and obviously lights up the wider area. There are obviously the other lighting around the station building as well to ensure it is well lit. So we've got some progress pictures. Those of you that are local to the site will obviously be aware that we've been in operation now for quite some time. A lot of work that we're doing related to the freight sidings job that's now operational, and other works related to the actual station building itself and getting prepared. So this is just a picture of some of the track panels that we have to bring to site, modular. It saves a lot of the on-site construction of having to build it on-site and the noise and the hindrance that comes with that in-situ form of construction. Again, this is one of the slides where there's animals. We might be able to put them to one side. So these are the new sidings that have been installed, and there's just a few pictures here, and it's difficult to see now in relation to the schematic below. Essentially, this turnout into the sidings here, Fen Road level crossing is.
I'm doing really bad there.
In the distance here, you can just about see Fen Road level crossing. So the project have had to renew all these turnouts leading in, realign the permanent way, which is the track, undertake all the signalling works associated with that. And it's quite an intense piece of work that has to be undertaken when trains have stopped, disrupting possession, so a lot of time overnight. And just so you can get a sense of scale, how close we are to that level crossing and the works that we're actually doing there. And this was a key piece of infrastructure that enabled the freight sidings to operate without failing on the main line.
And sorry, because I've only just realised it. And this is the main line is the section on this side where you've got the overhead cables and whatever that power the trains, and so there's a new set of points there, and then this new set that's all been put in to make everything work super duperly.
There's a final bit of work to be done then, just to tidy it up, so the ballast needs to be swept, so you can't see the sleepers and the lights. It doesn't look, might not be openly recognisable at the moment, but there's still a bit of work to do on that. Maybe that picture there as well.
Okay.
So this just shows the terminal sidings as well. So these are the two new sidings. So just in that yard, there's a Lafarge plant, and they bring in lots of aggregate on some discharging trains. So these big 40-wagon trains filled up with aggregate, and they discharge into the yard. And this is the terminus where they actually we've constructed for them, and they'll discharge their aggregates off to the left, which is right to the north of the site, away from the station building. Just out of interest. This is one of our Kirov cranes that we use. It's a scarce resource, to be fair. They're difficult to get hold of, and we have to book these about a year in advance And I really only just put this picture up to give you an appreciation of some of the planning that we have to go through to actually undertake these works. There's very few of these trains on the country that operate on the actual rail, operate on the rail, and with the extent of rail works that are going on at the moment, Crossrail and the like, these are very difficult to get hold of, so we have to book them over a year in advance. In a similar vein, when we're undertaking disruptive works, when we stop trains running, obviously there's a lot of people that are affected, and again we have to book these 14 months out in advance. So there's a lot of planning that goes involved to these disruptive possessions that you see happen when we stop trains running onto the network. And this picture really was just to remind myself to explain that, sort of rigor we have to go through.
Okay, and for the ordinary people in the room, a disruptive possession is when the normal scheduled passenger and rail train services are cancelled, suspended temporarily, so that we can come on with all this super-duper stuff and actually get on with the plant. Because you don't want live trains running while we're trying to do this sort of work, because people and trains don't mix.
Okay, again, those of you that are local to the area would have seen these new big grey structures appear out of thin air. These are new structures that are supporting the overhead line equipment, what essentially powers the trains when they operate. These gantries are put in wider to accommodate the platforms to be constructed underneath. A lot of the infrastructure out there as well had life expired, so it's needed to be put in advance of the station building being installed and the station becoming operational. This just looks like a boiler cabin, but it actually powers all the signalling in either side of Chesterton Junction for a good number of miles, and there's a key bit of infrastructure for Network Rail. It was quite a sensitive bit of work. Obviously, as a lot of you are aware, the infrastructure that trains run on is many years old, many decades old, and a lot of the cables degraded, and when you start meddling with this type of equipment, sometimes it unravels itself. You touch one thing and something else falls down elsewhere down the network. It was a very sensitive, critical piece of work that needed to be undertaken as part of the station project, but also because of, again, life-expired equipment. And that's been successfully installed and is now operational. It also gives a lot more security on the network and fail-safe systems. So now when there's power outages, there's backup generators that automatically kick in, and it keeps the network running. So it's a very good bit of equipment. It doesn't look very pretty, mind, or impressive, but it's a vital bit of equipment that will help you ensure trains keep running on time. Okay, here's a picture of a pile. So those big grey gantries that I pointed out earlier, this is what they sit on. These piles can be in the region of 12 to 16 metres in the ground, and they're vibrated, hammered or pushed into the ground typically. And this is just an example of one that's installed. Again, as you're probably aware, with being so close to the River Cam and the long embankment that we've got, access is difficult. So we can only install these via on-track plant equipment, which again means stopping trains. And again means what we need to be 14 months in advance. So something as simple as putting a foundation in the ground is something that takes up to 14 months to actually plan and implement. So it was a real success to see those go into the ground. Here's those of you that travel the train will have seen some of the platforms start to appear. The platforms consist of a composite form of construction, quite new. So these bottom panels that you see here are big segments, and you'll see a better picture in a minute, and they're polystyrene. They won't blow away. They're a new form of construction where it's like a condensed, dense polystyrene, which is lighter, quicker, easier to install. Typically, when you construct a platform, you generally need a vast amount of disruptive possession. Stopping trains, you need to stop them for a long time generally to install. And a company come up with quite a simple but very effective solution to try and minimise the time that we're disrupting passengers. And this was this polystyrene blocks platform. They've been approved around product for the required design life. And they're composite because there's a precast concrete slab that sits on top. Well, essentially, you'll be walking on. Again, here's another picture of these are what we call copers. These are precast concrete slabs that sit on top of the polystyrene and essentially the finished level. So there's a bit of work to do on that yet. It's just essentially, as we mentioned, these possessions that we bought best part of 14 months ago were to pull in these platforms and unfortunately we've been able to install it.
Gosh, it's my turn. Thank you. So the last few weeks, over the last couple of months, there have been five weekends when the railway has been closed between Ely and Cambridge, as I said, and that's allowed lots of people to get on and do their work on the railway. And for us, we needed to close the level crossing itself at Fen Road, and we've tried to tell everybody about it. We've continued to look at the programme to reduce the amount of time it's closed, and this weekend will be the last weekend that we are able to close it for this year. And so we're going to be closing it, unfortunately, between 10 a.m. in the morning and 5 o'clock at night during Saturday the 23rd. Some of the other ones we'll take about that later, but that's for this weekend, and we've been around and told everybody, particularly on the east side of the railway, that's going to be the state of play. And we've been talking to Camden Conservancy about using their towpath as a route, and we will have a couple of minibuses so that people can get from one end of Fen Road to the other rather than walking, because it's quite a long way, and also a minibus shuttle service which will take them up to the co-op and the main road while we do the works. We've used it on previous weekends, it's worked quite well. It isn't broken, so we don't need to fix it. We'll have another crack at doing that this weekend. Okay, let's go on. So originally on the left-hand side there, those were the times and the dates that we were planning to close the level crossing. We applied for the road closures. The red times were when we were going to have to do what we're doing this weekend in closing the level crossing completely. I'll show some pictures in a moment. And the blue times were where the level crossing would go up and down, but you wouldn't see any trains because we'd have some of that big yellow plant that Joe's been talking about, just sort of ambling across the railway backwards and forwards to get them on with its work. And when we first started the programme, we were looking at a total of 118 hours that we were going to have to close level crossing for over three particular periods, and the guys in the office have sort of realised that it was going to be horrendously inconvenient, and they've reshuffled their works, done some of it without needing to close the level crossing, and I don't know how they've managed to do that, and condensing other works into the time that we have got available. So, and we've only just done the maths tonight, and we found out that we've actually closed the amount of time the level crossing hasn't been available to private vehicles by 50%. Not bragging about that, we still had to close it, but folks are born with us, and we've been trying to find ways of reducing that time. So while we've been doing, while we've been closing the level crossing, it's been my job to stand out there and keep an eye on the contractors, but also to deal with members of the public and make sure the minibuses work and all of that sort of thing. So it's dark, it's cold, so some of the photos are a bit shaky, but we decided that it would be just nice to sort of show you some of the things that we do. So the first picture and this picture show the guys actually taking the level crossing panels out so that we can get to the railway. So that's why we have to close the railway, because there's no road for anybody to drive on. But we do have an emergency bit of road that we can put in if there was an ambulance coming and whatever. So that was covered. So and this is called a bobcat because it says bobcat on the side of it. It wasn't so moving so quickly, and that's a bit of gear which is quite nifty for when the guys leave these panels out. They can take them to the side because they've got to put them back in the right way, else it doesn't look very neat and tidy afterwards. So having done that on the first weekend, the next thing was to cut up the rail and the sleepers into lengths that we could pick up. So here are a couple of guys. The level crossing is still being taken out, and they're cutting the rail into 10-metre sections or whatever so that we can get it out as quickly as possible. And then we had a train that came in. It was quite a long train. It had got space to put the bits of rail and the sleepers and also the ballast that we needed to remove. And another part of the train had new materials in it, so that had to shuffle up and down the other railway line, the one on the east side. Let's not do up and down, while we played with the railway on the west side. So then you reach a point where you've got a train and the railway, and where it was by the level crossing, it's all gone and it's taken down, and then during the day other teams came in and put in new ballast and the new track sections, pictures of which Joe had got. He was working during the day and I was working during the night. And this is a little bit later on a night shift, and this is an horrendous bit of a single train unit that goes up and down the network, and it's designed to pick up the track, then it puts down some whisks into the ballast, turns it round, and it consolidates it. It is very noisy, but it's a very efficient way of consolidating the ballast, which is what you have to do, because if you put ballast down and track, it all tends to move a little bit. So by doing this a couple of times, it helps to hold the track in place and give everybody a safe ride. A safe ride, but also an even ride, because it takes the bumps out of the track. Bumps that go up and down, and the bumps that go from side to side. And this is the guy on the plant. This guy here has got headphones on and a walkie-talkie system in the middle, and he's actually talking to the train driver and telling him to move the train a bit. And these are the prongs that come down either side of the sleeper, because they don't want to damage it. Plays with the ballast, goes back up, and then it literally squeaks to the next set of sleepers. So if you do live in Moss Bank, or you have heard us on previous weekends, that's what we're trying to do. And we'll be doing that this weekend during the day. Okay? This is a really bad picture, but these are the guys who were working a couple of weekends ago. And what they're doing is they're what they call stressing the rail. And they do lots of things to the track. They cut it and then they rejoin it, and they weld it in front of you. And here they are cutting one side, and that one is still burning. The weld is still being finished off. So you've seen the picture of the overheads playing. We've got this goal post gantry, which Joe was talking about, and then we have to hang all the little bits and pieces on here, which then help with the alignment of all of the overhead cables. That's my attempt at a scenic shot, so we'll forget that one. And these are the guys. I was talking to some ladies earlier over here. These are and we were talking about the cattle grids on the sides, and that's what these bits of wood here and what these gentlemen are manhandling here to try and deter people from going onto the railway away from the level crossing. And that's just an outline of what we have been doing this weekend. Closing the level crossing 10 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock at night to allow us to take up those level crossing panels again, and primarily to do a final, use that big train to consolidate the ballast, and there'll be lots of other things going on as well, but that will be the last opportunity that we have to close the level crossing for the Chesterton station works. Very quiet. I will now ask Rob to come and field. I think Rob's got a few words to say.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As Chris said, my name is Rob Fairhead. I'm the sponsor for Cambridge North, which effectively means I'm the accountable name within Network Rail for the project. I commissioned the project. I'm accountable to my customer, the Department for Transport, for making sure the project gets built and opened on time to budget, scope and quality and all those sorts of things. So everyone on the project somehow ends up working for me. So a bit of a responsibility really. I just wanted to talk a bit about the opening date of the station, because there's been a lot of press speculation recently about what the date may or may not be. and I wanted to come here tonight and in front of you tell you what it is. We are now, our target date for opening the station is May 2017. Some of you may have read in the Cambridge Evening News recently. Our previous opening target date was December 16, and there are two principal reasons why we've had to slip that date, which we do regret. One of them is the issues that we've had with planning over the last year or so, and that's not a criticism of any of the planning authorities or any of the discussions. We've got very good relationships with all three councils actually, but it's just that the time it's taken has meant that we haven't been in a position to let contracts to our suppliers and book the railway closures that Joe was talking about in time to meet the December date. If effectively we're a few months behind on that programme. And the second reason was some issues that we had waiting for final confirmation of government funding. Obviously, as a public body, like councils, we can't spend money that we don't have. And again, we can't get contracts and that sort of thing. And it was actually only this December, so just before Christmas, that we received final confirmation of full funding from the DfT. So again, because that's had a knock-on date for letting contracts, etc., that's had an effect on the programme as well. We will shortly be publishing our Network Rail's overall net enhancements delivery plan, it's called. So it's the most big projects in the country, and that will have detailed dates in for each of our major projects across the network. So not even Cambridgeshire or Anglia specific everywhere. And there are two key dates in that we'll be announcing. One is an entry into service date, which is effectively when the station's all but finished and ready to hand over to the operators, and that's the 21st of April 2017. And then the opening date for public services is the 21st of May 2017, which is the date of the new timetable, it's the date of the summer timetable change in 2017. So you're the first to hear that, this room. Wanted you to hear it direct from me. We are sorry about the delay. But what we really prefer to do is to work towards a date that we know we can achieve, and rather than a date that we weren't confident we could achieve. So, it is regrettable, but I think it's, from our point of view, it's a better decision to have an opening date that we're certain about and we know we can meet than one that we try to meet and fail to meet, because that's not good for anybody. And that's really all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
I know Bodie's keen to talk to us, but if there are any questions, particularly about the new railway station, now might be the time to ask them while we're here, standing up. Councillor.
Can I just ask, on both platforms, will it be accessible for wheelchair users and anyone with disability actually?
Yes, we will. We like all railway undertakings, have to comply with accessibility guidance. There's a document which is publicly available, something like accessible train services. It's on the Department for Transport website, and we are required and will provide fully step-free access to the ticket office and to both platforms via, in our case, via there'll be three lifts. One in the station building, so you can get up from the ticket office up to bridge level, and then one down to each pair of platforms that Joe referred to earlier.
Okay, thank you.
Somebody else who's got a question. Gentleman there in the middle. Can I just make a suggestion?
Can I just suggest that we have Paul Mumford sort of touching on the planning issues and the timeline and timescale, and then a brief verbal update on the double crossing for Bodie, and then we'll take questions on all the various aspects of the project from there. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So, I'm Paul Mumford. I'm the South Council Councillor in the planning team. So when Rob and Joe and Chris talk about the planning application that's currently with us, and also the one that already has been passed the planning committee, that's a planning application that's been submitted to both South Cambridge District Council and Cambridge City, is the administrative boundary between the two districts runs just across the southern site. So in a sense, I'm here tonight representing both of the local authorities, and we report to, as Joe mentioned, the Joint Development Control Committee, which is the planning committee on which sit councillors from all three authorities, so County Council, City Council and South Cambs. That committee is actually, this will be the third time that committee has considered a planning application for this station proposal. As Joe mentioned, once when the County Council came through to get planning permission because we thought that the County Council themselves would be delivering the station. Then when Network Rail took over in terms of actually the responsibility for delivery, they needed to get their own permission. And now a third time to move the location of the car park and the access road, as Joe's mentioned. So in planning terms, the proposals for a station have already been considered and found to be acceptable by the planning committee. And so the focus really of what the committee will be asked to consider in March are the changes from the scheme that they've already seen. So the proposed change location of the car park and the access road. And Joe mentioned that there would be the potential in the future to build a multi-storey car park onto the new location that's proposed. The application that's in front of us at the moment, and therefore the one that the planning committee will consider, is for an at-grade car park. So that's just at the ground level. So the 450 spaces that were considered twice already by the planning committee is for the same number of spaces. So anything in the future, if Network Rail wanted to come forward to deck the car park up and pipe, we need to go through the proper planning process again. At the moment, we're in what we call the consultation period for this planning application. So it was submitted just before Christmas, and we're inviting comments on it until the end of January. And we're aiming, as Joe mentioned, to take this to the Joint Development Control Committee in March, which is the Wednesday, the 16th of March, which is my 40th birthday. So that's what I'll be doing on that then. And so I'm here tonight to answer any questions that might not be directed straight to the Network Rail team. And then if you do need to get in touch with either South Cambs or Cambridge City Council, because it's an application that crosses the boundary, then it's my team at South Cambs, and it's being looked after by the New Communities team, New Neighbours team, sorry, at Cambridge City. Stop there.
Okay, thanks very much, Paul. And Bodie, if you can give us your brief verbal update on the level crossing, and then we'll go to any questions that people have.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bodie Asami from the level crossing team. Thanks for inviting me here again once again, and I really appreciate it. I'd just like to give you a quick update of where we are. Since I last came here last June, we've now completed our outline design of the level crossing, and we're going to go into the detailed design. We've also gone out to tender now, so we've sent out an invitation to tender, and we're looking to let out the contract by March this year. In terms of road closure, I spoke about this last time I came here that we're still going to be having the road closure. Road closure is a requisite to have the recommissioning of the road. So we're still going to be working with everybody in the community to make sure that we don't totally complete the road, we don't completely close it while we're doing the work, and try and see how it can work. However, I can't give an ironclad guarantee about that until we have the contractors on board, and then we work on together to see which is the best way of implementing the road closure for the level crossing. I think there's been a precedent set here, so we're going to also be working with Chris and see how they've done it, and see how we can do it better while we're doing our road closure. Also, during the few days that we've had this break, last time I came here, one of the progress that we also had is the land agreement. Naturally, when I'm doing the level crossing work, we have a limit to which we are supposed to do our work, which is called the stop line. And it's just a few meters away from the level crossing. But because of the safety issue that we think is really important on this level crossing, we've tried to walk a little bit further down the line here. So we're going beyond our normal jurisdiction so that we can get footpaths for the pedestrians and the school kids around the area. So we've got an agreement to have about 2 meters wide into the neighbor's land, and they've agreed in principle to give us that land so that we can have the pedestrian pathway. This is going to make it easier and better for everybody in the community. Going forward, what we're trying to do is form a working committee. That working committee will encompass the project team, myself, and the members of the team. There's also a building project going on in the area, so they're going to be also involved in it. There's a circle part project, we're going to invite them also. The highways is also going to be involved in it, and the planning committee will also be involved in it. And some members of the public will also be involved in that committee. This will give us a way of coordinating everything together and make sure that information is passed to everybody in a timely manner. Proposed commissioning date. We've had to move our commissioning date due to the procurement procedure that's been going on. I think Rob spoke about moving dates because of a new system that we have now. We're now in public body work for the DFT, and we had to do some kind of reshuffling in the house. So we've moved the date for the new week now, hence why we're going to be proposing to commission in June 2017. Before then, I have Sarah Peters here, who is the Stakeholder Management and Communication Manager. She was also here last time. We plan to also have an extensive consultation with members of the public. We're going to be coming here, setting up shop and talking to people, members of the public, and how we can make things better. That's the update I have for you for now. Any questions, you're welcome. I've put some ground plans on the tables around. So if you've got any questions that you want to ask about the ground plans, it just shows what we're proposing at the moment, and how we're going to be trying to implement the ground plans. Any questions, Mr. Acton?
Thank you very much, Bodie. And just remind everyone that the on the buff-coloured sheets are the Q&As from the presentation back in June on the level crossing and on the station. If anyone got any points relating to this, then do by all means raise them. And any questions on the presentation tonight, on any aspect or issue that you want to raise a point, and then I'm sure the team will get back to you. Mr. Bond.
Thank you. Before I came out tonight, I was alerted to what appeared to be an unofficial path having been driven across the open space. Is that yours? From Fen Road onto the Hailing Way?
Yes.
It is.
That's mine.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that the joint committee that was actually operating until 6 months ago wasn't in operation, because I wouldn't have reacted to the alert that I got and passed it on to the enforcement officers to have a look at as an illegal development.
Right.
You have
the crossing, the route is temporary.
Yeah.
It goes over Network Rail land. That land is actually landlocked, so we've actually spoken to the owner of Hailing House to ask if we can use his driveway to come out onto Fen Road, and he has agreed to that, and that's where we've created a temporary turnaround for the minibuses that we use that go up and down Fen Road on the east side, and obviously that, you're quite right, that the break in the fence, which is sealed up at other times, allows us to provide temporary pedestrian routes to avoid a level crossing when there's no level crossing there, which is what we've tried to do. When we have, I think at the end of this weekend, we will look to permanently reinstate the fence adjacent to the towpath so that nobody can get through. And we understand, and the owner of the land has actually asked if we could leave the material that we have put there, because he can use that because he's going to start building his new houses there. He's told me, but I understand there's a planning permission there as well, so I assume he's got planning permission in the meantime.
No, he hasn't.
Okay, right, well that's fine, that's fine. As soon as he has planning permission, then he will be looking to develop that land.
Okay. No, the only planning consents on that land have been expired because they were first applied for in 2010, and the last planning application was withdrawn. Right. And there is none in at the moment.
Okay, that's fine.
I checked that this afternoon.
That's fine. It's nothing to do with us. It's our intention to leave the material where it is. We will seal up the fence and then we're very grateful for the access we've had there, and we will walk away.
Well, that's actually revealed a problem elsewhere. This has nothing to do with you.
Okay,
And I'll get someone else to sort that one.
that's
One thing I did pick up though, am I right in saying that the new level crossing will not be commissioned until after the station is open?
yes. Well, there are lots of reasons why, but I'm going to allow my colleague to answer them for you, and then if I can help him out afterwards, I will do that.
Okay. One of the things with signalling schemes like a level crossing renewal is that you can't do it while you're doing anything else there. Signalling is very sensitive and obviously safety critical equipment. And whenever you're altering the signalling equipment, you have to have what's called a wheels-free area. So you can't have any trains within sometimes miles of the level crossing, depends on the works. The rails have to be there, so you can't be doing track works at the same time because the guys effectively, when they renew the level crossing, have to go along and test that it's working in all conditions. So there can be no other engineering works in the area, no other works at all, no trains in the area, and all the track, etc., has to be there. So it's not possible to do works such as Chris has shown you earlier and do level crossing renewals works at the same time. For safety reasons, they have to be done completely separately. And obviously, you know, in this case, as Bodie's already mentioned, there are other things which are driving the time scale, but it's just not safe to do the level crossing works at the same time as other works. And we do appreciate that means more disruption than if we could do them together. But for reasons of safety, it's not possible to do that, I'm afraid. We are sorry about that.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for the explanation. Yes, Councillor Smart.
Hello, yes. So, thanks for all the details tonight, lots of information there. The most important thing I can think of from what you said so far for residents, I think, will be the car parking situation, which we've talked about before when residents have asked questions. And so, as is often the case these days, it seems with these sort of developments, is that things get built after they're needed. So it sounds very much from what you said tonight that you will be building a multi-storey car park sometime in the future. I know that's a kind of hypothetical statement, and if that is the case, then surely those 450 cars are already parking there on a station that's already in operation, needs to park somewhere. So my question to you is, what's the sort of strategy for providing parking spaces for those cars whilst the new multi-storey car park is going to be built? As if you don't have a strategy, they're going to be parking on residents' streets. Okay.
Yeah, that's a very good question. We often have this situation at other stations where we haven't upgraded car parks. You're right, it's not as efficient as designing it all in one go to start with. What I would say is we lobbied a number of years ago to have 1,000 car parking spaces at Chesterton, and we were advised that wouldn't be acceptable to the local authorities, which is why we ended up with 450. So we'd much rather have built them to start with, but we weren't able to for various reasons. And again, I don't want to criticise those reasons, but you know, that we are where we are. We have got experience at a number of stations across the network of building, particularly car park decking, whilst keeping car parks operational and doing chunks at a time. Because these things are quite lightweight structures, and you actually need only, say 4 to 6 car parking spaces out to put the supports in, and then you actually do the bulk of your works and sort of putting the Meccano bits together at weekends. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it, of course, is if all of the land at the Chesterton site is still ours. So if at the time that we're building it, the development isn't fully developed and handed over to Brookgate or whatever, subject to planning, of course, we might be able to look at putting some hard standing down on some of our other areas and actually keeping the same number of spaces, or probably a combination of both. But we do understand the need to keep as much parking within our control so that they don't go elsewhere. You're absolutely right. So we'll bear that in mind. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Bob. Any other questions or points at all? Right? Yes, sit down.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, one I was wondering, I'm appalled that this station is being delayed here again. I just think it's a scandal that we've had to go through so many planning applications to get to this point. Thinking back to some of the early decisions around the first planning application when I'm slightly more involved, there was various design compromises that were made because land wasn't being made available, decisions weren't being made by Network Rail. And I think if those decisions had been made in a timely fashion right at the start of the process, there would have been a much better chance of getting the planning application right the first time round. So I wouldn't want to do anything to distract you from actually just delivering this station and getting on with getting benefits for people. But at what point in this process do you go back and learn from this and try and make this process more expensive? Our railways are scandalously expensive to run, and just looking at the process that's happened here, I can imagine why they're so expensive to run, because we have these delays, we have these reworkings, and just nobody seems to be accountable for it. Who's accountable for it?
Oh, okay. I mean, I don't know if you want to respond on that.
I'll talk about lessons learned, because I think that's absolutely vital, and it's something we try and do on all projects. I'm actually also leading a scheme for a station rather similar to this one in Essex, that's a few years behind. And where you know, I'm very keen that we learn particularly from the things that have gone better on here. You know, you're absolutely right that had we collectively knew what we know now then, we would do things very differently. We'd have made different decisions. But you know, if you look at some of the decisions that were made individually over time, there were very good reasons for them, knowing what we knew at the time. So, for example, you know, the reason that the car park was previously in the triangle was because it wasn't clear that we would be able to move the freight sidings. So rather than delay the station and hope the freight sidings would move, decisions were taken to progress the station, you know, more suboptimally than we would have liked, but better than delaying the project. So I think, you know, undoubtedly when you look back, we could and should have done things differently. We need to learn those for the future. Equally, I would say that the conditions at Chesterton in terms of building a station on a site that's, you know, one of the biggest brownfield sites we've certainly got in our ownership, possibly in the country, and that had 2 operational freight terminals on as well. You know, there aren't many places like that that we've got. But yeah, we absolutely, you know, we've made mistakes. I think others probably, you know, may have done too, and we need to learn from that. Lessons learned is a continual process that we try and get better at in Network Rail. One of the things we do when we do start a new project is we do searches of other projects that we think we may have similar lessons, no matter where they are in the country, or indeed outside the country. If we think there's a precedent in Europe, we'll talk to our colleagues over there. I'm always sending people off up to Manchester and other places like that to go and look at that, you know, go and look at that project. In fact, only today, we in fact yesterday, well, Joe knows this, we send people down to Rochester, because Rochester's just been relocated and has built a new station, which has rather large similarities with Cambridge North. It's a 3-platform station, 2 through platforms, 1 terminal platform. We've sent people down there to learn the lessons of that already, and it's something we do take seriously and continually look at.
Okay, thank you much for that, Rob. I don't know if Paul's saying on the planning side, as we know, it's been quite complicated, rather sort of convoluted process at times in terms of the different number of planning applications that have to come in for various reasons. Anyway, any other points or questions at all? Or otherwise we can wrap it up there. I mean, if everyone is satisfied. But I'll have to thank Network Rail and all the team very, very much for coming on. These meetings have been extremely useful in terms of informing the local community councils and all of the parties involved. So thank you again very much for doing that. And to remind everyone on the final item on the agenda is about the volunteer for Cambridge event on Saturday, 3rd of January, 11 to 4 p.m. at Guildhall. And don't forget the special meeting. Yep, okay, that's fine, great. Don't get the special meeting of North End with you on the 4th of February and special meeting will take place.